from NPR. This is where we talk with entrepreneurs and business leaders about building resilience during this very challenging moment. Before we get into today's episode, I want to thank NPR sponsor HubSpot for their support of this show. Legacy CRM platforms have made you compromise for far too long. With HubSpot's CRM platform, you don't have to choose between enterprise tools that are powerful or easy to use. It gives you both, so your marketing, sales, and service teams can align with ease, accelerate sales, and anticipate every customer need. Finally, there's a CRM platform that helps you run better so you can grow better without complexity ever getting in the way. You can learn more at HubSpot.com. Thank you, HubSpot. That's how we can make these shows. Okay, on to our guest today. In the window next to me is Varshini Prakash. Varshini is the founder and executive director of the Sunrise Movement. Now, many of you watching know that normally we focus on businesses, entrepreneurs who build businesses, but the show is also about people who build movements. And Sunrise Movement is a really, really exciting movement. It's a movement of young people working to fight climate change through grassroots activism. It has exploded in growth. It's now one of the most powerful youth movements in the United States. It operates in more than 400 hubs around the country. Varshini, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
And if you are watching, however you're watching, Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitter or any of these platforms, if you are not a Russian bot, we would love to take your questions. So please submit them. If you're not being manipulated by those social media platforms, please send your questions to Varshini. We're excited to get them. Okay, let's start with Sunrise Movement. Before we get into how it started, just give us a background on what it is.
So yeah, Sunrise Movement started in 2017. It was launched by 8 young people, including myself, under the age of 26, with a pretty singular mission. It was to make climate justice that was rooted in economic and racial justice a priority in America for the first time in our history. And we were just young people who were fed up with seeing politicians kicking the can down the road, sweeping what is the greatest threat facing our generation under the rug and refusing to deal with the reality of the crisis at hand, and realized, at the young age of I was 22 at the time, there weren't any adults in the room, and we had to step up and take action.
Yeah, there are no adults in the room. It's crazy. It's insane. This is why Greta Thunberg has been such a powerful voice, right? It's like, it's insane that no adults are, I guess maybe older people are like, well, we're going to die anyway. But tell me about, how did you begin to form, to kind of organize what would become Sunrise Movement? So it's you and a few friends, I guess, and you're all committed to climate activism.
Yeah. It was a number of us who were kind of getting activated in the Obama days, right? So I was working on a fossil fuel divestment campaign at UMass Amherst, where I went to school. Others of us were working, on the international climate negotiations, or fighting against the Keystone XL pipeline, or so on and so forth. And I think we realized at the sort of culmination of the Obama years that much had been won, but at the same time, the power of our movements were not keeping pace with the rising seas, the worsening storms. Essentially, there was a crisis that was becoming a full-blown emergency, and we didn't have a force that could contend with the disaster that would be upon us. And so we actually went into a period of study. We gathered about 12 climate activists, young climate activists from around the country. We went into a period of study for a year, learning from other social movements, the civil rights movement, LGBTQ movements, so far as, Indian revolutionary movements, to understand how to build mass movements. And then we also realized, as we were watching, Bernie Sanders gain power, but also Donald Trump, when we reckoned with the fact that the climate fight and the climate crisis was not an urgent political issue by any means in this country, that we had to combine our social movement organizing with political power. And so when we launched in the summer of 2017, we had our theory of change is largely around building a critical massive, enthusiastically supported public officials on the issue, building a large and active vocal base and disruptive base of young people, and combining those two strategies for long-term change.
So Varshini, it's so interesting because there's so many parallels, right, between what you do and what you've been doing and what an entrepreneur does when they start a business.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you are an entrepreneur in that sense, and I hope that's okay. Me calling
yeah, that's
I really
fine.
think that it's an entrepreneurial venture, and it's not just about businesses. It's also about things like this.
Mm-hmm.
How do you begin to, because building a mass movement can't happen spontaneously. You can't just say to everybody, hey, let's show up here at 5:00. Like, there is real hard work to organize people, right? To get, because once you organize people, then you amplify an idea through thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of voices. Yeah. So how do you begin to organize people from, one small group to thousands?
Yeah. I mean, I will say the beginning days of Sunrise were not nearly as pretty as the actions at Pelosi's office or whatever else that people might know us from. It started, we had literally 6 of us or 8 of us at the beginning.
And this is in Boston, by the way, in the Boston area?
No, it's not. It was all over the country. So right. Some of us were based in Kentucky, some in Michigan, some in California, all over. And the first thing that we ever did as Sunrise was we took 15 of our friends and we canvassed. We went and talked to like over 1,000 people at the People's Climate March in April of 2017. 2 months later, we brought together 20 of the top leaders that we had worked with in the climate movement up until that point to Pennsylvania, to Philly, where we trained them in the basic sort of theory of change, the strategy, the story that encompasses Sunrise movement, and issued a call to action. Like, we want you to go back to the communities that you came from and start a local chapter in Sunrise and start pushing your politicians to get off of fossil fuel money, to put forward climate plans that are commensurate with what the science is mandating. And that kind of grew and expanded, and we did trainings, I remember like sleeping on the floors of just people I barely knew in Colorado, or, going out there and doing some trainings that like 3 people showed up to in the beginning days because no one knew who we were or what we were up to. But slowly we built chapters across the country. But I think everything came to a head when we did this quite dramatic direct action at Nancy Pelosi's office about a week after Democrats took back control of Congress in 2018 and said, our generation just helped you get back into office. Now we need you to take action and have our backs by backing the Green New Deal and by mandating that any Democrat that wants to claim the mantle of leadership in this party swears off of oil and gas money. Yeah. And I think because that moment, people weren't used to seeing people issue challenges to Democrats. People weren't used to seeing youth movements taking action. And because there was just a real moment around the climate disasters that were taking place during that time, and the IPCC report that had just come out, and this new leader in Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who joined us at that action, I think it created this moment of the whirlwind. And from then, just in 6 months following that action and all of the action that took place afterwards, we went from having just 20 chapters to having over 400 wow. in 6 months.
So, I mean, it's an important lesson, which is that sometimes you have to, or oftentimes because had you tried to kind of grow the movement simply by just reaching out to other activists, it might have been a slower build.
Totally.
But by doing something dramatic and radical, going to Nancy Pelosi's office, sitting in there, you got a lot of media attention, and that essentially enabled you to attract enough attention where a lot of other young people were like, well, what is this thing? Let me check it out.
Right, exactly. And so it's coupling these big viral moments that garner media attention, but also just spread the word organically to potentially millions of people who have never heard of a movement like this before, but would totally want to participate in one. And then giving them routine, consistent opportunities and structures within their own communities that they can take action on the day-to-day. So it's like, yes, come to DC. We issued the call and over 1,000 young people came to DC within 10 days, 3 weeks following this action at Pelosi's office. And then they went back to their communities and started local chapters where they could continue the work. And so I think, both combining the viral moments, but also the brass tacks day-to-day grassroots organizing that is what builds power in local communities.
After the pandemic began, there were so many people who really wanted to help frontline healthcare workers, for example, or people who were doing essential services. My wife got involved in a group called Frontline Foods, and literally overnight. And this was really a lot of the people who kind of built this movement came from the tech sector. And what her observation was how remarkable they were able to scale this organization from 0 to 100, to becoming a huge organization with millions of dollars in a matter of weeks. And her observation, because many of the people involved came from the tech sector, and her observation was like, these people have experience scaling movements or scaling businesses. So for them, it was like, okay, here's the playbook. And it was so interesting to hear that perspective. And I wonder whether there's something to that with what you're doing, because what you're doing is, we're talking about like life or death, right? It's not about building the next tech company or how to get CBD or, delivered to your house faster, which a lot of, right? It's, or like how to get a pizza robot made. This is about like our lives and the lives of our children, what you're trying to do. So do you look to those models for kind of inspiration on how to scale what you're doing to something that is so big that it cannot be ignored?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that has to be the plan. I think for us, we are also recognizing when you consider the expanse of what it means to tackle the climate crisis. It isn't just we decarbonize or whatever. There's a whole, we probably have to pass dozens of pieces of legislation at the federal level over the next decade of time, which means that people with our values have to govern and hold on to governing power for perhaps a decade or longer. Growing up sort of at I feel like I grew up at the sort of line between the death of bipartisanship and the birth of political tribalism. And it is almost inconceivable for me to even imagine the federal government being able to pass that level of policy. So for us to exert the kind of pressure both outside the halls of Congress as well as electing the kind of people who can exert internal pressure, that will require a movement of millions. And so I think the idea is, how do we, and what Sunrise is attempting to do is taking direct action, but also ultimately we are going to have to create a movement that has millions of people that can quite literally bring business as usual to a halt in this country. That can say, like our institutions, our government, our towns, our cities, they cannot continue to operate as though this crisis is not upon us. And that will require many, many more millions of people being in the streets.
Varshini, it's very frustrating, I think, for many people that climate change has become a political issue because mass hurricanes kill Democrats and Republicans. I live in Northern California. The choking smoke damages the lungs of people on the left and the right. It doesn't matter who you are. Climate change is real. It's a scientific fact. And the fact that it's controversial is insane. But that's the reality. So opponents of what you do, of what you're trying to do, they have played a very powerful game of seizing power and of the pursuit of power at the expense of things like bipartisanship and compromise. Do you now believe that people in your generation and people with your political values have to actually do the same thing, but from the other side of the aisle?
Yeah, absolutely. Our whole strategy was just witnessing the way, I think we realized very early on, we cannot continue to just rail against a system a set of people in the political establishment who do not come from our communities, who do not hold our values. There is only so far you can go in pushing somebody like Donald Trump to care about the climate crisis when he is meeting with, key officials in California and saying that he knows better than the science. And so I think in these moments, it becomes clear there's no negotiating with crazy. There's no negotiating with somebody like Mitch McConnell, who has taken millions and millions of dollars from the fossil fuel industry. We have to kick people like that out of office, and we have to replace them with people who will fight for our communities. And that might not happen in the next 2 years or the next 3 years, but we are showing right now that young people, but people in general are ready to get politically activated. In Jamal Bowman's race, and this is also, amongst Democrats as well, there are lots of Democrats who, while they may purport to understand the science, have not taken action or heeded the dire warnings and are not fighting with as much, with a deep understanding and visceral understanding of what the calamities are ahead of us. And so, we saw Jamal Bowman oust Elliot Engel in New York 14. Sunrise teenagers, literally teenagers, made 850,000 of the 1.3 million phone calls that were made to voters in his district, ultimately helping him defeat Elliot Engel. So I'm watching 14-year-olds who can't even vote in this election, who are training and leading hundreds of other young people in how to get politically activated. So this is a possibility. I feel a lot of hope around that. And I think our next generation is fully activated.
In any kind of campaign, right, whether it's a business campaign or a campaign for an important movement, like the most important movement, which is climate change, it's a race for attention. I read an article in the New York Times yesterday about how the most engagement of any Facebook pages in sort of the media adjacent world are right-wing media personalities, that they have more engagement than like the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, and the Washington Post combined, which is remarkable. And so much of that is because of how humans respond emotionally. But you are also in this fight for attention, right? And I know you do videos, and I know you put out, messages. But are you looking at some of these activists? For example, the Lincoln Project, a group of former Republicans now supporting Biden. They've been pretty vicious and cutthroat in their anti-Trump ads, in ways that liberals and Democrats just never have been. Are you looking at some of those and saying, you know what, we got to take off the gloves and we've got to really, we got to fight hard?
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question, because I don't know if I've heard anybody, usually people are like, you could put on some gloves. Y'all are being a little bit mean.
Oh, really?
Yeah, totally. I mean, after we did that action, it's sort of hindsight. In hindsight, I think everyone looks at that action that we did in Pelosi's office and is like, oh, wow, that was such a great strategic move. But that day I was getting call after call after call from reporters being like, why on earth are you going after Democrats? Why on earth would you do that? Why would you make these choices? And I mean, we've also gone after Republicans in the same way, and asking, like, why do you need to use these sort of disruptive, conflict-oriented tactics? But the truth is, like, it has sparked the conversation. It has, many of these tactics that were used, really, we learned from studying the civil rights movement, who were expert strategists.
Amazing organizers. I mean, the bus boycott is one of the best. Anybody who wants to start a business should read about the bus boycotts.
Right.
And how in the methodical, careful planning that went into that, that was able to organize thousands of people and then create carpools to bring people to work. It was incredible.
Absolutely. And Project C in Birmingham stood for Project Confrontation. And this was, these were strategically wielded moments of action that were aimed at forcing an entire nation to grapple with the reality of Black Americans in this country. And, you saw kids getting shot at and fire hosed and unleashed dogs upon. And it was something that woke up the nation to the crisis at hand around white supremacy. And so, I don't think we're at that stage quite yet with the climate movement, but I think for people to truly understand, the reason why we do civil disobedience, or the reason why we take this type of action, is so that we can bring the kind of private suffering that is happening all across the country into public relief and force that into the national dialogue and debate.
Varshini, it's interesting because you understand the urgency of climate action, and many people do, but there are many people who, for some reason, I'm sure you've encountered them, who just don't. And so I wonder how you actually turn that person around. I mean, if you have somebody who says, oh, all these, environmentalists, I just, under those those layers of intransigence, it might be somebody who's afraid of losing their job, or that, they work in an industry that depends on, fossil fuels, or whatever it might be. How do you even try to engage those people, or do you focus on just energizing people who are already, who already believe in the science?
Yeah. I would say for the most part, we focus on those who understand the reality of the climate crisis, who are terrified about it and want to do something about it, but haven't yet found the community or the movement to participate in. And I do find that fear holds those people back as well. We know young people, actually of both political parties, are terrified about the climate crisis. And we know that young people support moving to a renewable energy economy, in super majorities. The problem is a lot of those individuals are sort of standing on the sidelines. And most of the reason why they are standing on the sidelines is because they literally have not been asked to join. And so what we found was, for a very long time, the climate movement was kind of doing a lot of preaching to the choir, a lot of navel gazing, if they even had, grassroots organizing efforts at all. A lot of them did not. They were either, on the Hill, lobbying efforts, or policy ventures. And actually, it's relatively new that we have mass organizations that are targeting everyday people who have not participated in movements before to join in. And I find the most effective ways to bring individuals into the movement is, one, literally to ask them and see what they say. I think a lot of people do not have ask the question, will you join a movement? But two, helping people identify, like, what's your skin in the game? What's your stake in this fight? What do you believe? Who do you love? What do you love that stands to lose in the midst of the climate crisis? What do you care about? It could be, your parents' dairy farm. It could be, I don't know, like someplace, your home. Maybe your home is at risk of the climate crisis. Maybe you have family members that have lost homes in the fires, whatever it might be. For me, like, I'm the child of two immigrants, and the story of the way the climate crisis is unfolding in India affects me super deeply. And it is the reason, I think, why I so clearly pursued the path of climate action. And so I think if you can identify that fire that is already burning with you and bring it out, that is the spark that gets you involved.
I'm getting a couple of questions here, so I won't get to all of them. And thank you for asking them, folks. This is James Chang from Facebook. James asks, how do you go about fundraising? How do you how do you, because it costs money to do these campaigns and to get the word out. And I know that you're probably almost entirely volunteer run. So how do you actually raise the money to amplify your voice?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we really rely on both grassroots donations as well as foundations. And so we run a really robust grassroots donor network program and particularly ask people to become monthly donors. And so it allows us to actually plan into the future if people aren't giving, $15 once a year, but maybe are giving $5 every month, or $50 or 500, whatever you can afford. So that is like the most sustainable way. And grassroots donations are also amazing because they allow us to not necessarily have to be beholden to foundations or wealthy individuals, but allow us to be beholden to like the everyday people that we're trying to organize.
Do you imagine, like, there was a moment in the in the last decade where like the Tea Party, and the Freedom Caucus, I don't know how much freedom there was there, but they, they really actually put a lot of pressure on conservatives, and in some ways is why you've got a very, very, the moderate Republicans of the 80s and 90s aren't really around in the Congress anymore, because these grassroots organizations were very effective. The Tea Party and others that really challenged candidates in primary races and so on. You're seeing a little bit of that among Democrats, not too much. You've seen a little bit of that, but do you imagine, or is your goal eventually to make this movement so powerful that you can actually do a version of that you can go into congressional districts and endorse a candidate and support a candidate that may turn, let's say a more moderate or conservative Democrat and bring in a more progressive Democrat as the nominee?
Exactly. And I think what the Republicans did was they shifted the entire center of gravity around the conversation towards a more conservative worldview. And a lot of people, they're like, why don't you just compromise with the Republicans? Why don't you find some kind of middle ground? But the truth is they have pulled the entire conversation so far to the right that on climate change, I mean, the middle ground is probably worse than we are today. And so we need a new center of gravity. And what young people are doing is holding the Democratic Party, but also, the country as a whole to a standard of we have got to be in line with what science and justice demands. We don't, we are not about one political party. We're not even about one political champion or anything like that. We are about the ultimate mission at hand. And if we stay true to that and we build a movement that is powerful enough, perhaps we can shift the entire conversation towards that end.
In terms of money, right? And it's interesting because you conservative movements like the Tea Party and other movements as a model. I mean, they were very effective, whether you agreed with them or not. They did a very good job for pursuing their aims. But a lot of these movements had serious corporate backing from, we know from whom, organizations and individuals who have very strong ties to the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of money there. I mean, are you willing to take money from corporations or from, big funders in order to, in order to be able to play hardball?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're discerning about which funders we actually take money from. We do take money from foundations. I think the key here is that you can do quite a lot with not that much money. I mean, if you think about the first year in 2018, when we did that Pelosi action, when the Green New Deal became a national conversation, when we saw those thousands and thousands of young people come out of the woodwork for the first time, we were working on a minuscule budget, like minuscule. We barely had, I think, like eight staff, maybe less. We had a very, very small team, but I think we can't underestimate underdogs in this situation, especially underdogs who are terrified for our future and are willing to do whatever we need to do to ensure that the future doesn't unfold in the way that we are, the future that we are barreling towards. And so I think, there's a real question of at what point does that not become enough? Do you need more resources? But I think we have a lot of money at our disposal, not just as Sunrise, but as the entire left or the environmental movement. The question is that being wielded effectively or is it not?
Awesome. Varshini Prakash, co-founder of the Sunrise Movement. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for having me.
We'll put links to Sunrise Movement in our Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds, so check those out. Before we go, I want to thank a bunch of folks for watching. Ali Prescott, I'm sorry to get your question. Mary Eileen, Jalal Khan in Southern Maryland, and Sandra Serena in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, loving the HIBT audiobook. Thank you. I appreciate that. I can't get to everyone's name, but thank you for watching. Couple quick announcements. Next week, we're going to take a break from this live series for obvious reasons, the election. We need people to go out and vote like your life depends on it, because it does. We're going to be back, but we will have a new episode that comes out on Monday. It's a story of Famous Dave's Barbecue with Dave Anderson. And it's a really cool story about how he built this company and a lot of ups and downs. Also, speaking of our podcast feed, if you haven't heard the episode of the Mcbride Sisters collection, please check it out. This is the biggest Black-owned wine business in the U.S., founded by two sisters who were separated, did not know the other existed, and reconnected or connected when they were in their 20s. It is an incredible story. It's a beautiful story, and they have created an amazing business. So please check that out. Also, once again, a quick plug for the How I Built This Book. It is out. If you are building something, if you want to build something, if you want to just learn about the entrepreneurial mindset, check it out. It's available wherever books are sold and in audiobook form. So that's it for me. Have a great weekend, everybody. Make sure to vote. Please vote. And thank you for joining us. Varshini, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, everybody.